going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of In Focus. My name is Grayson Singleton. Thank you so much for listening on Spotify, watching this on YouTube, or wherever you're possibly finding this show. Coming up on today's episode, Stephen Curry has gone ballistic, Justin Fields is being disrespected yet again leading up to the NFL draft, and Texas has a music problem. Find out why that is in just a little bit, but let's get the ball rolling and let's bring back our favorite segment and another installment of What the Heck Happened Last Week. And we're going to start with Major League Baseball, and the Los Angeles Dodgers and the San Diego Padres have become the league's most watchable rivalry. Over the past 2 weeks, the Padres have taken 4 of the first 7 games in this series in the 2021 Major League season from the Dodgers. 4-3 seems like a typical NBA Finals series. There are 12 more matchups between these two teams, who are now first and second respectively in the National League West, after the Dodgers knocked out the San Diego Padres in the playoffs last season. The story has been undoubtedly Fernando Tatis Jr., the shortstop who set the league on fire last season, becoming one of the league's most dynamic, electric, and watchable players. He has 6 home runs in the 7 games against the Dodgers this season, including this past series where he hit 2 home runs off of ace Trevor Bauer, another 2 home runs off of legend Clayton Kershaw, and before hitting one on Sunday night off of starting pitcher Dustin May. Both teams have excellent rotations and incredible lineups that make them possibly each of the top 2 teams in the National League. And depending on how seeding plays out, we could see them in the NLCS with a berth to the World Series on the line. But what makes this rivalry even more interesting is that there's really bad blood between the two. And this is something that has fallen off, I believe, with the Yankees and the Red Sox over the last couple years, is that there's just no storyline between the players, the managers. I mean, there always will be one with the fans, particularly between the Bronx and Boston. But in LA versus San Diego, particularly with Manny Machado in the middle of it, these two teams hate each other. So it'll be interesting to watch them not only this season, but as time goes on, as characters like Machado, Tatis, pitcher Trevor Bauer, and as well as others continue to ignite this rivalry, which could easily become, given both teams staying relevant, could become the new Yankees-Red Sox, I believe. To the NBA, and Steph Curry had a month for the ages. In the month of April, in which he still has 2 games left, Steph Curry has averaged 38.2 points per game, shooting 53% from the field, including 47% from 3. His totals include 5 40-point games, one of them in which he dropped 53, and 85 made threes thus far in the month. That broke James Harden's record from a few years ago. To put this in its proper perspective and to show just how dominant Steph Curry was in the month of April, there was only one game, in which he did not score 30 points. And that was Friday night against the Wizards when he scored a measly 18. Other than that, he has scored 30 in every single game. And even better, without Klay Thompson and with a slew of injuries across the board, the Golden State Warriors are 31-30 and 10th in the Western Conference. So they are just inside that range for being eligible for the play-in tournament for the last couple of seeds. Steph Curry now leads the NBA in scoring with 31.2 points per game. He is the only player other than Michael Jordan to ever average 31 points per game at 33 or older. Let's transition to the NFL, and the NFL draft is on Thursday, so just 3 days away from the taping of this show. And reports came out of San Francisco yesterday that the 49ers, with their number 3 pick, are down to 2 options at quarterback. Now, we all know they're going to take a quarterback after they basically mortgage their future to move up to the number 3 pick. And the report came out that they are down to 2 quarterbacks. Mac Jones, obviously, which I've religiously ranted against the 49ers taking, and Trey Lance. So the big question here, obviously we know Trevor Lawrence is going 1 and Zach Wilson is likely to go to the Jets at number 2, which I still don't get how he ever leapfrogged Justin Fields. But why are the 49ers not taking Justin Fields? Because here's the thing, Justin Fields has been proven to excel against the highest competition. He beat the living crap out of Clemson in the college football playoff, by the way, throwing 6 touchdown passes with shredded ribs. and he has always performed on the biggest stages. Here's a number I have for you. He is 9-2 at Ohio State, where he went to college, against ranked teams. And he's had an appearance in the national championship and 2 appearances as a starter in the college football playoff. Trey Lance, obviously a great talent. Trey Lance is no Justin Fields in terms of proven against the highest competition. Neither is Zach Wilson either, but he played a little bit more stiffer competition than Trey Lance. So why does Justin Fields continue to fall? And the answer is, and nobody even on ESPN knows the answer to this, we don't know. We don't know why Justin Fields, because at first I thought, oh, maybe he might be smaller, but when I was doing my research for this show, I found out he's 6'3", 220 pounds. So he's no small guy. So size isn't an issue here. And really, aside from one hiccup against Northwestern this year, Justin Fields has never really had a bad game in a while. So I don't know where the justification for Justin Fields falling so far has become. If you're the 49ers and you are intent on moving on from Jimmy Garoppolo, which I don't believe Jimmy Garoppolo is a big problem. I think having $80 million worth of cap space on injured reserve is likely the reason why the 49ers were so bad last season after appearing in the Super Bowl. But if you are intent on moving off of Jimmy Garoppolo, do not mortgage your future to go draft Mac Jones. Because if you watch Mac Jones play, who does Mac Jones somewhat remind you of? Jimmy Garoppolo. Add Justin Fields, get the extra mobility, a better arm, a more electric arm, and add more diversity to your offense. Don't just go draft the exact same dude who missed a couple throws that could have won you the Super Bowl. Just my 2 cents. John Lynch is a great general manager. Kyle Shanahan is a good coach, but I really hope they do not draft Mac Jones at number 3. All right, that's it for what the heck happened last week. Let's move on to this week's main story. The University of Texas, the alma mater for the NBA's biggest draft bust ever, the school that continually loses football recruiting to a school in Oklahoma, and the one that thought it was a good idea to hire a coach with a more checkered history than the New England Patriots. More on Steve Sarkisian later. Anyway, there's a real problem in Austin right now because the biggest revenue generators at the school, the athletes, like it is at every Power 5 school, have raised serious concerns about something that doesn't even have to do with sports. It's not their coaches, like what happened at Iowa with their strength and conditioning coach. It's not playing during a pandemic, which would be a reasonable concern, but we've gotten past that. It's not even whether or not they're paid. This time, athletes are concerned about the school's song, The Eyes of Texas. So today, I want to explore the history of the song, explore why the athletes are maybe taking offense to this song and petitioning for it to be dropped, as well as the responses of those around UT. And I find this subject particularly interesting, and I know this was in the news about a month ago when I was sick, so I had to table this because other topics like the MLB All-Star Game and the shooting of Dante Wright came up. But a friend of mine mentioned this to me over the weekend, so I decided why not bring it back, also because more news releases have been running articles about this as the story continues to develop. So I think it's still a pertinent time to discuss this issue. So let's get started with this, and let me begin with this. The song is not racist in and of itself, because that's the concern, is that the song might have some racist elements in it. The song itself, I've looked up the lyrics myself, the song is not racist. The only thing close to racist that it could become, that could be made out of this, is that it is sung to the tune of the song I've Been Working on the Railroad, which if you don't know the history of that song, I don't have time to get into it, but you can look that up for yourself. So the lyrics and the content of the song is not the issue. The issue comes up when you look at where the song played. And according to an article that I read from CNN, which, by the way, if you don't trust CNN, I found this exact same quote in 2 other websites as well. The song was, quote, first performed at a 1903 minstrel show, a form of entertainment where white performers often wore blackface and presented negative stereotypes of black people, end quote. So basically, the song was used in an arena and in a setting that was bad. Like, I hope we can all agree on that. Because the performers obviously dressed up in blackface, which was normal during the time, because this was also, in case you are not well versed in the history of America, around the early 1900s. This was around the Jim Crow laws, and toward the back end of Reconstruction following the Civil War. African Americans had now been freed from slavery, but really weren't free in the country, as we were right on the doorstep of the mass segregation. And right now we're kind of in this middle part where it was commonplace for white people to basically make fun of black people and other forms of mistreatment, but we'll focus on this one for the purposes of this topic. So after this revelation came out, after concerns arose back in July, we'll get to that in just a second, the University of Texas hired a 25-person committee to look into the history of the song, and the committee found that the history of the song was, quote, complex, but the song had no racist intent. Again, furthering my point that the song in and of itself is not racist. So I want to hammer that point home, and that's why I keep repeating it. The song is not racist. Where it came from is problematic. And is this history really complex? And this is where I start to lose faith in the committee. Because there are a lot of variables in the history of this song. If you look into the history of it, there was including a possible connection to the former Confederate General Robert E. Lee, who would tell students back in the school in Virginia that the eyes of the South are upon you, not the eyes of Texas, as were rumored, but those were just rumors that were quickly dispelled, which basically any possible connection to Robert E. Lee has been disproven, as well as a lot of other variables to the Confederacy. So the song has no ties to the Confederacy per se. But this is what we do know. There is one thing that we do know for sure from a myriad of sources and committees, is that the song was a way of making fun of black people, which hopefully, in 2021 America, which I know there's a lot of things we don't agree on, but can we all please agree that making fun of another group of people is unarguably bad? Moving on. The students here at the University of Texas, including athletes, realized that the history of this song, and during the time of immense protest following the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota last summer, petitioned the school to cease playing the song. Obviously, the committee was formed. They found that there was no racist intent, and the song has since continued to be played. Now, the saga of this gets very, very dicey when you enter the 2020 college football season at Texas, because while over the summer the school agreed to change the names of some of the buildings, including renaming their football stadium, by the way, and also changing the names of some classroom buildings, similar to how the formerly known as Morrill Hall was changed here at Oklahoma State. But players demanded that this song be dropped because of its history, and it even reached the point where the band refused to play the song. Some members of the band, which led to the entire band being suspended for the football season because no agreement could be made. Then comes the football team, because like here at OSU, we play our alumni song after football games, after basketball games. They play the Eyes of Texas after these games, and for the most part, it's been commonplace for the football team to remain on the field for the singing. The players ditched the song during the first 2 home games of the season. Then, after their game against Oklahoma at the Cotton Bowl, quarterback Sam Ehlinger opted rather abruptly to stay on the field and participate in the ceremony. And that's when all hell broke loose, because the team's quarterback now was showing dissent from the rest of the team. And as you might be able to guess, the locker room was divided. On October 24th, at the request of athletic directors and head coach Tom Herman, as well as many people from around the school, and I'll get to them in a second, the team stayed on the field after their game against Baylor. However, not enthusiastically. Most players stood with their hands on their hips. Some raised the hook 'em horns sign. Most of them did not sing, and some players even went as far as to kneel during the play, which I'm sure angered a bunch of people. So during the course of this, students didn't necessarily act out of turn or out of line. They complied with school regulations, went through the proper ways of filing grievances. Where the situation gets bad, and where it really draws my attention to, is the response from fans and the school itself. Because ever since that committee went on that search throughout its history and said that there was, quote, no racist intent, end quote, the school has brushed aside any concerns about the song. As a matter of fact, athletic directors and the university president have gotten involved, repeatedly requesting athletes to stay on the field and participate. Alumni, however, and donors have gotten involved. And this is where the situation gets really bad. Because former Texas defensive back Caden Stearns, who is now in the NFL, said that he and some of his teammates were threatened by donors and alums on the field or on the court. They were threatened that they would have to stay there, or else, quote, they would have to find jobs outside of Texas if they didn't participate, close quote. Let's take it a step further when one unnamed donor said, quote, and this is a direct quote, "It is sad that it is offending the blacks. As I said before, the blacks are free and that it is time for them to move on to another state where everything is in their favor," end quote. By the way, as egregious as that quote is, can we also agree on one more thing? Anytime a sentence says the blacks, chances are that's not good, whatever is about to come out of that person's mouth. And clearly this unnamed donor, which I wish he had his name, was in complete error here. You want to know another one? After saying that 6% of the Texas student population is black, which is true, Larry Wilkerson, who was a graduate from the University of Texas, class of 1970, wrote to the school saying, quote, "The tail cannot be allowed to wag the dog." And if that part of the quote is not bad enough, he goes on to say, "And the dog must instead stand up for what is right. Nothing forces these students to attend UT Austin. Encourage them to select an alternate school," and in all caps, "now," end quote. And now we get back to Steve Sarkisian, who at his introductory press conference before he takes the field as a coach, before he's ever coached one game at the University of Texas, because he will take over this season, says, quote, "We're going to sing that song and sing it proud," close quote. Here's the problem with what's going on here with the University of Texas. Number one, if you feel like as a grown adult it is okay to threaten kids' livelihood, because saying you should go get jobs out, you would have to go get jobs outside Texas, that is threatening kids' livelihood. Those kids are trying to play football and make their environment as comfortable for them as possible. Those kids did nothing wrong. And if you are a grown adult, in Larry Wilkinson's case, a class of 1970, so probably mid-70s, there is something wrong with you. And those people who have been threatening guys like Caden Stearns, and writing things like this should be utterly and utmost ashamed of themselves. That is shameful, those quotes that I just read. That's number one. Number two, as much as I dislike it and as disgusting as those quotes were, that is a form of logic. It is. I'm a logical person, and I can recognize that this is a form of logic, albeit a bad one, and I do not like it. This is particularly troubling because this is in no way an ideal that is supposed to be in our country. And if there's a running theme in my show with these main stories that I do, they have some connection, although they're about sports, to our American society. And this is in no way an American ideal. And it's troubling that this love it or leave it way of thinking has proliferated through America, because remember that the United States of America was formed So this sort of thinking did not happen or did not have a home. This was something Americans fled from when they decided to separate from Britain. This is something that goes on in China and in North Korea, where any form of dissent is hunted. This happened in France during the Reign of Terror in the late 1790s. So this historically is not good. However, it is making its way back into society. And this is something that I said about back in October when we were talking about protests. Because back in October was Colin Kaepernick's birthday, and I did a segment on Colin Kaepernick with his protest, and I highlighted that America, in and of itself, its very existence, is a protest taken to the utmost extreme, a war. And so the fact that Americans all of a sudden are saying, wait a minute, no, we can't protest, is very counterintuitive and very ignorant of history. But this way of thinking of love it or leave it, or just don't challenge the status quo is very troubling. And the person I put blame on is this guy. Because the former president, Donald Trump, an incredibly powerful and influential person, might I add, played a huge role in making this logic seem acceptable. Because with quotes like these. Now, if there are kids in the room, I will give you a language warning, but I decided to keep the full video because I believe it's pertinent and relevant to my point. So quotes like these are the ones that are really troubling. Take a listen.
Love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired.
The president tweeting just a few hours ago saying the NFL players are at it again, taking a knee when they should be standing proudly for the national anthem. Numerous players from different teams wanted to show their outrage at something that most of them are unable to define. They make a fortune doing what they love. Be happy, be cool is the message from the president. Fans are paying so much money to watch and enjoy. Football game is no place to protest. Most of that money goes to the players anyways.
You have to stand proudly for the national anthem. Well, you shouldn't be playing. You shouldn't be there. Maybe you shouldn't be in the country.
Okay. Obviously, these are horrible and quite the antithesis to a country that is famous for its freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of expression. Obviously, all of these within legality. But the problem is, where does this come from? Why all of a sudden is this okay? And that's what's troubling, because disagreement among humans is perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, we disagree all the time. My best friends and I disagree on a lot of things. However, if you don't agree with somebody, you don't tell them to leave the environment or the situation or their country or their home or their home state. You don't threaten people's livelihood because of a disagreement. You know what you do when you disagree? You put together logical, civil syllogisms and arguments and points as to why you don't agree. You don't resort to hate speech like we tend to do. And the reason why I think hate speech and rhetoric like what you saw in those clips of President Trump is because people are not investigative enough anymore. There's a very small portion of people who are. And I have been blessed to be able to be around some people like that, who can put together these arguments. And even then, we might still not come to an agreement, but those conversations are edifying. There is nothing edifying about hate speech or name calling. That's just petulant. Or telling somebody to leave. Telling somebody to find another place to live, learn, or work never is the case. And number one, that's not even an American ideal. The American ideal here is to make this land where somebody can pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And a land where there's liberty and justice for all. Not agree with us and agree with the status quo that we have set through years of slavery, discrimination, and racism. Or else leave it. That's not it. And And going back to my point where I say, if you don't disagree, find ways to make logical, civil arguments. That's the whole purpose of my show. Because I don't expect everybody who watches this show to agree with me. I really don't. The purpose of this show, and I've said this before, is to make people think. And for me to challenge myself to think. And what's going on here at the University of Texas is not on the same racism scale as something like what happened to George Floyd or something like that. Obviously not. The problem here is how this was handled. If you don't want to drop the song because there's no racist lyric, fine. But when you have donors who are far too old to be engaging in the kind of behavior that I read to you, that are saying things that they're saying, that's a problem. That's a problem. That's an emulation of our society, and that's not good. That's why this story that's the only reason the story draws my ire, is because it is symbolic of a society that for some reason has lost the ability to interact with people who don't agree with them. And if something does not change, and maybe it will now that Donald Trump is out of office, because this is a form of logic that he made okay and that he popularized, and I believe is part of his lasting legacy in his one term as president, maybe we can start to come back to being able to engage civilly with people who don't agree with us. And when that happens, that will be a really good day. We'll see you guys next week.